So in this video, we are going to look at creating some HTTP GET requests using Volley. So one of the first things that we need to do is to give our Android application permission, compile time permissions to access the internet. And we can do that by editing our project's manifest file, which can be found in the app hierarchy under manifests. So we open that file up and we can start adding a user permission. And this will, if we were to install this application on the Play Store, then the user would be prompted to allow this permission when the application is first installed. So we can, there's a long list of different permissions, but the permission that we want is the permission to access the internet. So that's the first thing that we need to do. And so the manifest file, it's all written in XML, so we just use a little tag, the user's permission tag, to enable that internet connectivity, that functionality. We don't have to worry about any of the other settings. And in the next part, what we're going to do is to actually create a HTTP GET request using Volley. So we've got our main activity here, which sets up our layout. That is going to create for us a very basic boilerplate layout. So for this example, we are not going to worry about adding any widgets or that type of thing. We're just going to purely run our Volley requests in the body of our onCreate method. And so to do that, we need to create a request queue object, which is how we interact with Volley. So we can create a little request queue object. You can see here, as I start to type in the object name, it gives me request queue as the suggestion, which is the camel cased version of the request queue class. So I just push enter to accept that. And to actually create the request queue object, I'm going to use the Volley factory, and I'm going to create the new request using my application context. So what I do there is I just pass in this, and I just get my application context like that. And from there, I now have a request queue object that I can use to send HTTP GET requests and other types of HTTP requests to my web service. So what we're going to have a look at doing is interacting with our dog API because it's nice and simple. The JSON response object is also nice and simple, so it's nice and easy to manipulate. So what we'll do is look at creating a JSON object request, and we'll create a request object. And there's no factories or anything for this type of object, so we'll just use the constructor and create an object. And the parameters of this constructor, they take 4 different parameters. That's the type of GET request. That's the type of HTTP operation. So we can, if you control click and control left click, you can highlight the class and then open that up and look at the constructor, and also have a look at the Java doc. So it's a very useful thing to be able to do. So you can see here that we're going to be supplying the method. We want to use HTTP get, the URL, the JSON request. So the dog API, it's very simple. It doesn't accept a JSON object, so we can just leave this as a null parameter. And then it's got a listener for our response, and also another listener for our error, for any errors that might crop up, like communication errors. So we'll just come back to our main activity. And so there's a nice static interface here that has some constants that we can use, and we're going to use the constant for get. And the next parameter that we want is the URL, and to make our code nice and neat and tidy, I'm going to extract that URL out into a separate string object, just so that as we construct our JSON object request, our line of code doesn't become too unwieldy. Right, so the next part is the JSON object request, and our dogs API is very, very simple, so we can just pass a null. And then the next part is the actual response listener, which will construct a JSON object response for us. So we can create a little JSON, well, a little response listener class inline object to handle that. And we can also create another response error listener inline object to handle any errors as well. And so that is our request object. To simplify the code a little bit, I'm going to extract these objects, these inline objects that I've created, these anonymous inner classes, into their own object declarations. So just refactor those and extract into a variable. And yeah, that's okay. We can call that, actually what we might do is we might call that the response listener, and we'll also extract out the error listener, and we'll extract the variable for that as well, and we'll call that the error listener. And so from there we have our JSON object request. We do need to populate our URL, otherwise our JSON object request won't be going anywhere. So I'm just going to copy across the German Shepherd URL that I was using earlier. And so what we're going to do there is we're going to connect to the dogs API, select the German Shepherd breed, and then get a random German Shepherd image. And that response is going to be processed in our onResponse callback method. And right now I'm not going to do anything particularly useful with that. I'm just going to dump it into the system log under the key of response. So we can use the response object, and we can just use the toString method to allow us to dump all the information that we download from the API into the system console. And so we can also do the same thing with our error stream as well, our on error response callback. So we can give this the key error, and what we can do is we can use the Volley error object, and we can get the message associated with the error, and that will tell us what the problem is, you know, if it's a network problem or some other type of error. So right now we have a very simple JSON object request. We have a request queue, we have a request, and what we have to do next is to use our request queue to simply add our request objects to the queue. And then that particular request will be processed with a best effort strategy. And we'll just space that out a little bit more, just so our code is a little bit more elegant. And so we can run our code now and deploy it to the emulator, and we should get some information from the API coming up in our system log. Right, okay, so here we go. So you can see here that the response method, the response log key is shown over here, and we are now downloading that response message with a status of success from the API. We didn't have any errors, so our on error response callback, that didn't occur. Some issues that you might have here, you might have issues with permissions. So if you missed the user permissions step, so if we just delete this, you will get an error that looks like this. So we'll just remove the internet permission and then run our application again, and we'll have a look at the type of error that we get. Right, so we're using the debug category here, but we're going to change over to error, and you can see here that we've got this security exception, and and it actually tells us what the problem is. We are missing the internet permission in our manifest file. The earlier stack trace is a little less easy to understand, but because you get a stack trace, but the useful thing about that is you actually get the actual line number inside of the Android stack that actually caused this problem, and it appears to be the part of the stack where it's trying to look up the host name. And you can walk the stack, and eventually you'll come back up to your code. Okay, so we can resolve. We know how to resolve that problem. We can simply put our permission back in, run our code again, and our application should work. Okay, so we don't have any errors coming up in the error category anymore. If we move over to the debug category, though, we can see that we now have our JSON response object. Okay, so that is an example of how to download a JSON object from an API. Other problems that you can experience are limited network connectivity, and so I think we can change the network connectivity in our settings, but I might actually just, oh, is it in cellular? Network type, full, signal strength. We might just turn the signal strength off perhaps, see what happens. And we'll try running our application again. So change the setting in the emulator. I'm not sure if this will work. We might have to turn the Wi-Fi off. Okay, so it looks like the message still got through, and it might simply be because I still have Wi-Fi on my computer. So I'm just going to disconnect my Wi-Fi, and we'll see what happens when the emulator loses connectivity. So, it's always useful to look at the happy path with your programming, but it's also useful to have a look at what happens when things go wrong as well. So run our application again and see what comes up in the log. So this time we didn't get a response object, but if we have a look at the error log, there's nothing in the error log. Let's have a look in the verbose. Nothing in the verbose either. Are we actually outputting something? It looks like we are. We might, what we might do is we might just toggle a breakpoint in the error callback, and we'll run our program in debug mode and see what comes up. Okay, we've got a debug. We'll just run our program again, see what happens. Okay, so that's really interesting, is that our application hasn't jumped into the on error response. Oh, it looks like something's happened now. Okay, so it's just me being a little bit impatient. So it actually did seem to take a little while. So you can see here that after a little bit of time, there must be a timeout setting somewhere. We have eventually toggled a breakpoint in our error handler. And you can see here that we've got this no connection error. And so we output that to our error log with this E method. So we'll finish the program up. There's nothing really, and there's nothing else that we can really do here. We just have to finish the program. Okay, we can see that the exception came up in the console. And we can also see that the exception came up in the debug category for our log, and it should also come up in the error log as well, in the error category. You can see unable to resolve host dog.co, no address associated with hostname. So that's one of the other error conditions. So later on in the semester, when we start to deploy this code to mobile phones, sometimes these are the types of errors that you get. And a mistake that some students make is that they want to get their program working as fast as possible. So they make these anonymous inner classes, right? But they forget to actually and enter some code in the error handler. So errors are happening, but they're ignored, and then weird things start happening in your program. And so it's always better to actually put something into all of your callbacks, all of your response handlers, all of your error handlers, even if it's just a little placeholder that puts the error value into the system logcat. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. And in the next video, we'll have a look at how we can slice and dice our JSON objects and get into being able to dig out different pieces of information that we might be interested in. So with our dog API, we get information, like the name of the breed, and other information like the URL of the image objects for that particular breed, as well as some other metadata. So we'll have a look at how we can do that in the next video.